So here we are back at the Blue 300E to do a bit more maintenance on it today. I have got the new fuel injectors here to fit and the various seals and hoses and whatnot to attempt to reduce the amount of vacuum leaks on this thing. The spray pattern on the original injectors was quite atrocious. I'll show you that shortly. That is a shit spray pattern. So we've got a new throttle body gasket to go on first, just because that has been off. I've also cleaned out the intake manifold as well, so that can go ahead and get reinstalled now.
This way?
Yeah.
This orientation? Or that orientation?
So after physically installing the throttle body, it's just time to connect up its linkages and return spring. That's pretty straightforward. And it just has a single 3-pin connector for the throttle switch for the idle and full wide open contacts. Then it's time to move on to reinstalling these new hoses. This is the idle air hose that also has the cold start injector pushed into one of its connections. It's quite difficult to get in, to say the least, in that location. So this hose has been installed now, and now the cold start injector is pushed into it and it's getting screwed down. I would advise using a bit of silicone grease to make these hoses more cooperative to go on. But of course Tim has run out of that and we have none to use here. I'm not at my house, so I've got plenty of it. Next was installation of the idle control valve. That's just held in place with 2 screws and 1 electrical connector of 2 pins.
Say the ratchet now.
Of course it is a rock hard airflow meter boot. I would advise changing that as well, but that'll come later. So the vacuum lines are connected to the throttle body before putting this on, just for ease of access. Now that can be tightened up. And Tim is just tightening up the clamp on the bottom of the boot going to the throttle body. So as mentioned in a previous video of mine, these plastic injector sleeves are no longer manufactured. I'm pretty sure there's none left in Australia and none in the USA or Germany. I think there's still some left in the UK dealer network, so you still can be lucky and find some if you look really hard. Now the reason they get black on the ends here is because the crankcase ventilation is getting mixed in with the idle air. So you've got crankcase ventilation coming via a permanent vacuum that's supplied to the valve cover here. Fresh air is drawn in through here from the air filter, and this ventilation line is mixing with the idle air that is supplied through here via the idle speed controller. And it eventually all of the idle air does go through this port and swirls around the tip of the injectors to further atomize the fuel for a smoother idle. Of course, the air that's leaking in through this connection is not metered, as in it's not going past the airflow meter like this idle air is. However, it's got a controlled aperture. It's a small aperture, I think either 2 or 3 millimeters. It only allows a small amount of vacuum to leak through here. So due to the lack of silicone grease, just lubing up these O-rings with engine oil. I mean, they've got to be able to cope with it because there's crankcase vapors going very close to them. You don't want to be pushing them in dry because that just ruins O-rings. It's a nice snug fit. You want it to stay that way. So these are the inner injector seals, and they are slid over the tip of the injector. You do want to lubricate that. I ordinarily use silicone grease, but yeah, we don't have any today. Tim's just preparing them with a little bit of engine oil so that it slides over that injector nice and smoothly. You don't want it like tearing up the surface of that soft rubber as it's sliding up the shaft of the injector. And then it can quite easily, once that's done, slide into these sleeves. We can put a bit of oil again on the outside of these, but this is a lot softer. That should just press in nice and simply. So I'll hand this one over to Tim and he can prepare that one. I believe he's done the other 5. They're ready to go. We'll just leave the protective caps on those injectors while we're still working to prevent junk going inside them. So the 6 new injectors are now installed. They just need to be tightened up. And while they're open up like this, be very careful. Don't allow any junk to get inside them. Unfortunately, the protective caps don't really sit on there once the brackets that hold them in place are installed. So without the fuel distributor installed, you can see that this airflow meter is returning home as it should, because there is a return spring inside. If this is tight to move, even with no fuel distributor, then it's all gunked up with junk inside and it needs to be pulled apart and cleaned. And also note that it's not binding up at any point. If it's binding up, particularly near the closing point, well, that's going to cause issues. It needs to move with absolutely zero touching. This is perfectly adjusted.
25.
So the 3 screws that hold the fuel distributor down are going in now. Once again, I have to stress absolute cleanliness is required. You do not want anything falling into those ports on the fuel distributor because they're just going to end up blocking up your new injectors or doing damage to the fuel distributor itself. Ideally, they should be covered with something while he's doing this, but he's being careful. So we've just completed our session of mental gymnastics trying to get these pipes reinstalled. If you do one at a time, it's actually not that hard. Just be very careful with these clips when you're undoing them because they may break. But yeah, it's not actually that hard if you do them one at a time and you find the correct order in which to do them. but they're all on. Tim's just tightening them up now, and the connection for the fuel pressure regulator is still yet to go on. We'll do that after he has finished tightening everything up. So Tim's EHO valve does leak, but he can't afford a new one right now, so I'm just lending him a spare that I've got in good condition. This is a virgin one. No one has ever tampered with the mixture screw, so we're going to leave this alone because I just want this as a spare. When he buys a new one, he's going to give this back to me. So this is Tim's original EHO valve. Unfortunately, it is junk because it's leaking out of the weep holes. It's not just a case of needing new O-rings for the fuel distributor. That does not fix it. Once they're leaking through the weep holes, it needs to go in the trash because it's finished. There's no repairing that. So this one's EOL. So everything's tightened up now. We're ready to give it the first test. So just connecting up the battery now. So this fuel pump's going to need to be primed 3 or 4 times. Tim's going to do that with the key, but not starting the engine obviously. And just listening to it to hear the change in frequency of the pump, because once it slows down, you know pressure has built and it's probably ready to start cranking. The old air filter is getting replaced now as well. So it's a genuine MB one that's gone in there. Now we can give it a start. As it turns out, it appears that my spare EHO valve is also junk. So yeah, probably a bit worse than the one he had on there. So we'll probably need to swap that back again. Still purging the air out. And brand new injectors pop at a much higher rate the very first time before they settle down as well. Anytime you do work on the injection system, you should do the warm idle mixture adjustment and make sure the duty cycle's around 50%, which we did. Just test driving the old M103 now. It's about to give it a bit of stick on the public roads here, nothing illegal. So it would seem that the hesitation at acceleration is gone, but the idle isn't 100% smooth, but there are still some other rubber bits that were a bit questionable, plus the ignition system still hasn't been addressed, but definitely an improvement on the acceleration hesitation that was there before. I suspect that's mainly just because of the spray pattern of the injectors. Poor old M103 getting a hammering. What was the verdict on that, by the way?
That was fine. That was fine.
So hesitation gone.
Yeah.
Excellent. So probably just the shitty spray pattern of the injectors alone was enough to cause that hesitation issue that we had. Time will tell if we can improve the idle though, but more work is needed. And we still haven't changed the original oxygen sensor yet either. That is due for replacement at 150,000 Ks, which it's basically done now, so it needs to be done regardless. So yeah, no hesitation at all, and it's pulling hard.